The story starts with a game called Altina Fantasia, which is basically your standard romance action RPG. It features a plot set at a royal academy where the goal is to take down the Demon King. It seems like a typical adventure, but the game is actually famous for having amazing world building and a really solid combat system. It's widely called a masterpiece, though there's one specific thing that almost every player absolutely hated about it, even with the great reviews. People couldn't get over how the final boss was just completely lame and lacked any kind of charm, especially since this guy is supposed to be the true mastermind who only reveals himself after the Demon King is already dead. His name is Duke Luciel von Central, a villain who barely even appears in the main story. He just shows up at the very end and gets beaten in like a second, which is why everyone calls him a total disappointment. Later on, a fan book came out and revealed that the developers actually cut all of Luciel's backstory just because they ran out of time during production. The fans lost it when they found out, saying the lore shouldn't have been skipped and that the character shouldn't have even been in the game. But even with all those complaints and the messy development, the narrator somehow ends up waking up inside the world of Altina Fantasia himself. Luciel stares at his hand like he can't believe what's happening. He's just realizing he's actually got some serious talent hidden away, which makes him let out a little laugh since a perfect idea just popped into his head. He's looking pretty confident, but the truth is, this guy used to be a regular corporate drone who died from working too much, and now he's been reborn as Klaus Rainford, just a low-level guy serving the final boss. It's a total disaster because in the game's ending, every single one of the boss's followers gets executed, and Klaus is right there on the list. He's losing it because usually, people reincarnate as the hero or the main villain, not some random mob character that took him days to even remember. But then he stops and realizes something that might actually change things. And right then, his butler asks if everything is okay, calling out to him while he's deep in thought. Klaus just waves him off and says he's fine, by telling the guy he needs some space to think alone. The butler, a guy named Oliver, who's also his teacher, just bows and heads out, leaving Klaus to figure out his next move. Klaus used to think he was just stuck waiting for his execution day as some random mob villain, but the truth is that there's actually a crazy amount of hidden power tucked away inside him. Even though they're a little fuzzy, he can still tap into the memories of the original Klaus. And even though the original guy was pretty mid at swords and magic, he decides to start practicing because he's actually feeling pretty hyped. While Klaus's very first swing with the sword is honestly pretty weak and pathetic, but as he keeps going, he starts picturing a top-tier swordsman he remembers from the game. After just a couple of tries, his form gets way better, and he can't even believe how fast he's picking it up. Moving on to magic, he takes Klaus's natural talent and mixes it with all the pro tips he knows from playing the game. And it works like a charm, since he manages to blast out a massive fireball on his very first shot. He decides to test out some other spells too, and he's clearly got way more talent than he ever realized. Klaus looks down at the spark in his hand, completely floored by what just happened. Every single spell he tests out ends up being way more powerful than anything the original Klaus could do. And moving on, he heads over to a large mirror in the room to get a better look at himself. He stands there thinking while staring at his reflection, realizing that he's actually a really good-looking guy. He's pretty impressed with his own face. But then he starts thinking that if the game had actually shown this version of Klaus, he definitely would have been a huge hit with the fans. No matter how many times he looks, he's convinced that combining the original Klaus's natural talent with all his own expert game knowledge lets him pull out some seriously crazy power. It's a total game changer, and right then and there, a determined smile creeps onto his face as he makes a massive decision for his future. He's dead set on one thing. He's absolutely not going to die from overworking himself like he did in his last life. Since the only real letdown in the entire game was how lame the final boss turned out to be, Klaus sits back and decides to take matters into his own hands. He plans on becoming a way more interesting and perfect final boss than Luciel ever was, making sure the game gets the epic ending it deserves. To make it happen, he pumps his fist and tells himself that the long road to becoming the ultimate boss starts with just one step. Klaus pumps his fist with a fired-up look on his face, declaring he's going to stack up enough bad deeds to become the most charismatic villain anyone has ever seen. Standing in his massive library, he decides right then that he won't be picky about how he gets things done as long as he reaches his goal. And with that settled, his face goes totally flat as he realizes he actually needs to sit down and figure out what his very first move should be. He starts thinking about how the Rainford family name is already trashed, mostly because they spent years looking down on everyone else while living in luxury. It's been about 6 months since his parents were killed by monsters, a tragedy that forced Klaus to take over the whole estate when he was only 15. But since he was raised by those corrupt nobles, the original Klaus grew up to be a selfish, small-time jerk who nobody really liked or respected. Klaus looks off to the side, thinking that even though it's a pretty sad backstory for a minor character, the way the guy actually behaved makes it pretty much impossible for him to feel any real sympathy for the person he's replaced. Still, he realizes that he can actually use this terrible reputation to his advantage, right as a loud knocking at the door breaks his train of thought. Oliver the butler steps in to let Klaus know that dinner is ready, and Klaus tells him he'll be right there. Klaus heads into the massive dining hall, thinking that before he gets to work on his villainous plans, he should at least enjoy one of his few perks, a high-end meal. The estate chef shows up at the table with a covered platter, looking professional while Klaus sits there basically vibrating with excitement. The chef sets it down and presents the day's menu. Klaus knows the original version of himself was obsessed with the finer things, which means the food in this house is always top tier, and as he looks at the first dish, he's definitely impressed. He thinks the chef is really killing it today because the presentation alone looks like something out of a 5-star restaurant. He takes a closer look at one specific plate with a dark, rich-looking cut of meat on it and asks what he's looking at, leading the chef to proudly explain that it's red dragon liver. Klaus just stares at it for a second. Then his face completely drops. He repeats the words red dragon liver in his head like it's a death sentence, because it turns out he absolutely hates liver. He can't deal with that weird, raw smell it has, which immediately brings back bad memories of his old corporate life. Back then, he always had to play nice with clients and force down food he hated just to stay polite. But then, he stops himself. A new idea hits him right there. He realizes that being a villain means he doesn't have to be polite anymore. Klaus tells himself that he's aiming to be a charismatic villain, so he decides to use this moment as a chance. He pushes the plate away and flatly says he doesn't want it, which leads to him putting on his best menacing face. He glares at the chef and tells him never to bring such garbage in front of him again, saying the man should be ashamed, but the chef completely loses it. He starts panicking, reminding Klaus that he was the one who specifically asked to try this rare delicacy in the first place, causing Klaus to actually pause for a second. He looks pretty confused and asks if he really said something like that, mostly because he's dealing with a massive headache. Between his old life, the game's plot, and the actual Klaus, he's got memories of 3 people floating around, making the original guy's past feel pretty blurry and hard to remember. The chef keeps going, explaining how he had to beg the town merchants just to get his hands on such a high-quality item, so Klaus decides to double down on the villain act. He shouts that the current version of him never gave any order like that. Then he calls out to his butler, Oliver. He points at the chef and gives a harsh order to throw the guy and anyone else who helped buy the food into the dungeon for a week, leaving the chef absolutely terrified. He starts shaking and begs Klaus to please reconsider the punishment, but even Oliver looks a bit concerned. He adjusts his suit and asks if maybe that kind of behavior is going a little too far for just a bad meal. Oliver tries to step in, saying he doesn't know what the chef did to upset Klaus, but he's sure the guy didn't mean any harm. Yet Klaus doesn't budge at all, looking completely cold as he says this whole situation is just how things are supposed to be. He doubles down on the act, telling Oliver that if anyone actually tried to hurt him, a punishment this small wouldn't even be close to enough. Menti raises his hand and makes it clear that anyone who decides to go against him is going to learn exactly why that's a mistake. And when Oliver tries to argue, Klaus cuts him off instantly, telling the butler that this is a direct order and he needs to just shut up and obey. Oliver finally gives in with a worried look, saying he understands, while Klaus just smirks and starts walking out of the room like a true boss. Once he's alone, Klaus starts laughing to himself about how perfect his villain act was, feeling so satisfied that he doesn't even mind missing lunch. Back in the room, the poor chef is totally crushed, collapsing onto his knees and crying about how unfair the whole thing is. Oliver just stands there in silence, watching the chef lose it on the floor as the reality of the situation sets in. He adjusts his glasses, thinking to himself that while Klaus has always been a bit of a jerk, something feels way different about him today. Oliver stands there thinking about how Klaus is acting way more unreasonable and harsh than usual, and the chef is still on the ground crying about how hard he worked to find a merchant who actually had red dragon meat for the meal. But the thing about red dragon liver is that it's only good if it's super fresh. And Oliver realizes as he walks away that there haven't even been any reports of red dragons being hunted around here lately, which makes him wonder where that liver on the plate actually came from in the first place. He stops to really think back on everything that just happened, especially Klaus's weird comment about how he'd give away worse punishment to anyone who actually tried to hurt him. Oliver starts to worry that Klaus was hinting at a real threat, so he decides to try a piece of the meat himself to see what's up. He takes a bite and his eyes go wide as he realizes something crazy about what he's eating. A whole week passes by after that, and Klaus is just chilling by the window feeling pretty good about things. Klaus stands by the window feeling pretty proud of himself, thinking about how his plan to do one bad deed a day is really helping him build up that evil reputation he needs to survive. And just as he's basking in his own genius, Oliver knocks on the door and asks for a moment. Klaus tells the butler to just come in already. He asks what's up, and Oliver says he wants to talk about the red dragon liver from the other day. Klaus thinks back to how he actually threw the people responsible for that meal into the dungeon for a full week. He figures that releasing them now is the perfect move. They'll go out and tell everyone how cruel he is, which is exactly what he wants. He starts laughing to himself, but then Oliver speaks up, saying it's amazing how Klaus saw through the whole thing from the very start. Klaus just stands there looking completely blank. I'm wondering what the hell the butler is even talking about since Oliver continues, explaining that the meat wasn't from a red dragon at all, but was actually the liver of something called a hungry bird. He assumes Klaus already figured it out, but they confirmed the chef was totally tricked by a merchant into buying the wrong stuff. It turns out some guy was using a magic illusion tool to make cheap meat look like a luxury dragon liver just to scam people. Oliver looks down with a serious face, telling Klaus it's incredible how he saw through the whole scam the second it happened. He says it's exactly what he expected from his master, but Klaus is standing there looking totally shocked, screaming in his head that he actually didn't know a single thing about what was going on. The butler keeps going, explaining that the merchant who started the whole mess has already been hunted down and caught. And it turns out the guy thought Klaus was just some clueless noble who couldn't tell the difference between cheap meat and the real deal. Klaus stands there with a blank look, thinking the guy's disrespect is so over the line that he probably deserves to be executed for it. Oliver brings up Klaus's earlier threat about making people realize what happens when they cross him, and explains that he took those words personally. He decided to seize most of the merchant's money and is now forcing the guy to work for their family for free. He adds that for a greedy merchant, losing all his cash and becoming a servant is a way worse punishment than death. Klaus just stares at him, wondering why the hell his butler is making these massive decisions without even checking with him first. But Oliver just moves right along, sliding an envelope across the desk and saying, there's one more thing he needs to give him. Oliver shows him a stack of letters, explaining they're actually thank you notes from the chefs he just let out of lockup, and the letters are intense. The staff says that even if they were tricked, serving bad food usually gets you killed. They're so moved that Klaus only gave them a week of labor that they're practically worshipping the guy. Klaus just stares at the paper with a dead look, trying to figure out how people he threw in jail are actually happy about it. Word starts spreading fast through the manor about how he can see through any lie and how he's actually a super nice boss. One of the maids asks her friend if she's heard the latest rumors about Master Klaus. While outside the estate, the locals are talking too. One guy tells his buddies that the head of the Rainford family personally caught a massive fraud and handled it like a pro. Between the staff and the townspeople, the dude's reputation is basically blowing up, making Oliver look like a proud dad. He tells Klaus that he's honestly never been more honored to serve him than he is right now. With the update finished, the butler gives a polite bow and says he'll take his leave, finally leaving Klaus alone. The second the door shuts, Klaus's legs start shaking like crazy before he just collapses on the floor. Klaus stares down at the broken pieces of his plan, thinking about how he was only supposed to focus on a cool death as the final boss, but everything is going sideways. He grips his head and shouts, wondering why he's accidentally becoming a respected ruler instead of a villainous mastermind. It's like the universe is playing a joke on him. As the good ruler labels start piling up, he realizes he's moving further away from his dream of being a charismatic bad guy. 2 weeks have passed since he reincarnated, and while he's been pacing around trying to ruin his reputation, the locals just end up liking him more. He looks completely drained, thinking about how much it sucks to be stuck with such good luck. So he decides he has to take action to stop this positive momentum before it's too late. He grabs a dark cloak and throws it on, looking sharp and determined. He's heading out for a personal inspection of the Rainford lands to see what's actually going on. As he walks through the streets, he thinks about how equipping a sword finally makes this feel like a real fantasy world, and he reflects on his first 2 weeks. Between all the boring paperwork with Oliver and his magic training, he's realized this town has what it needs to survive. But it's totally dead compared to the capital. He looks out at the quiet, empty streets, taking in the fact that his territory has zero energy. Klaus looks down at the quiet streets, thinking that if the main city is this dead, The surrounding areas are probably even more of a mess. But for him, this is actually exactly what he wants to see. He pumps his fist with a smirk, feeling like things are finally moving in the right direction because he's convinced there have to be people around here who absolutely despise their lord. He knows that to be a true villain with charisma, getting hated by the public is part of the job description. He starts walking away, figuring Oliver was just gassing him up when he said his popularity was through the roof, but his thoughts are cut off by a loud shout coming from behind him. He stops and looks over his shoulder as some guy yells for a brat to hold it right there. Turns out a big merchant in a top hat has caught a little kid by the arm. He's furious, yelling at the kid for trying to swipe his goods, and the kid just freezes up, looking totally terrified as he realizes he's been caught red-handed. He starts shaking and begs the man to let him go, crying about how his little sisters at home have nothing to eat. The merchant doesn't care at all and just laughs in the kid's face. He holds up the fruit, mocking the boy by saying he couldn't afford it even if he worked for a month, especially since it's a high-end delivery for the Lord. He tells the kid to go eat weeds, while nearby, a woman watching the whole thing notes how many kids from the slums have been turning to theft lately. She thinks it's a sad situation, but doesn't do a thing to help. People in the crowd start shouting for the guy to show some mercy, wondering where the guards are while Klaus stays quiet under his hood and the merchant keeps stomping on the kid. Even though people usually hate thieves, it seems like most of the crowd is actually feeling sorry for the boy. And honestly, it looks like they're just looking for an excuse to take out all their own daily stress on a rich merchant. Klaus watches for a second before muttering to himself that he guesses he doesn't have much of a choice here. He decides to step in and walks right up to the scene, catching the kid completely off guard. The boy looks up and is totally stunned to see someone like him showing up, and everyone nearby starts losing it. The kid realizes he's looking at the Lord, while others can't believe a guy like him would even be in this part of town. People are whispering, wondering what he's planning and if he's actually about to personally save the kid. Klaus keeps walking forward until he's standing right over the merchant. The guy immediately stops and starts sweating, backing away in a hurry as he sees the look on Klaus's face. So the kid starts looking at Klaus like he's some kind of hero. He reaches out with this hopeful look and thanks the Lord for coming. But Klaus just looks down at him with a cold stare. He asks the kid what exactly he thinks he's misunderstanding. Klaus looks down at the boy with total ice in his eyes, telling him that someone like him has no place in this territory. The air starts to whip around as the kid completely panics, begging for mercy and asking the Lord to just forgive him already. Klaus isn't listening and just holds out his hand to trigger his spell. He calls out, "Wind Prison," and the magic goes off, sending the kid into a total state of terror. He starts screaming at the top of his lungs while the wind picks him up and tosses him around like a rag doll. Inside the cyclone, the poor kid is just spinning in circles until his head is completely fried. People watching from the street are losing it. One woman screams while a guy nearby yells about how insane it is to use magic on a child. Klaus just smirks to himself, thinking that being some kind of perfect saint was never his plan to begin with. He's leaning into being a villain. Looking at the crying kid, he tells himself that he isn't here to protect some random poor brat. To him, the choice is easy because the merchant is the one who actually brings him all the high-quality fruit. Since the guy is useful, Klaus decides to side with him, and he realizes this is the perfect chance. It's the best way to tank his reputation and make sure everyone in town absolutely hates his guts. Klaus looks at the terrified crowd and thinks to himself that he can't let a perfect chance like this slip away. He crosses his arms and stares everyone down, asking if anyone actually has a problem with how he handles things. While the townspeople stand there shaking, he just hides a smug smirk because he starts shouting at them, making it clear that he'll never tolerate this kind of stuff in the land he's supposed to rule. He leans into the act even harder, pointing at the crowd and warning them that they better not forget what they saw today, and deep down, he's totally hyped. He thinks he nailed the performance, playing the part of a heartless villain who uses a kid just to scare the locals into submission. He can basically see his evil charisma points shooting through the roof. He figures he must have banked at least 100 points with that stunt, but then a guard in full armor comes sprinting over to see what all the noise is about. The guy stops dead in his tracks when he realizes the Lord himself is standing in the middle of the street. Klaus looks over and thinks the guy's timing is actually perfect for his plan. He gestures toward the swirling cyclone and tells the guard that the criminal is locked up tight inside that wind prison. He explains that the spell will wear off in about 5 minutes, so he's leaving the rest of the cleanup to the guards while he heads out. Klaus tells the guards that if they're confused, they should just ask the crowd for the details. He waves them off and starts walking away, leaving the soldiers standing there with no clue what's happening. But as he leaves, He reminds himself that the wind prison spell doesn't actually have any power to kill. He just doesn't have the heart to actually take a kid's life. So he figures that once everyone sees the kid looking completely wrecked and dizzy from the spinning, his reputation as a villain is going to hit rock bottom, which is exactly what he wants. He heads down the street, letting out a loud, fake villain laugh, thinking about how much he's looking forward to the fallout tomorrow. Back at the scene, the guard looks around at the nervous crowd and asks what the hell is actually going on. A woman nearby explains that the kid was caught stealing, and the Lord decided to use that terrifying magic on him as a lesson. The guard stares at the cyclone, thinking the whole thing is way too much. He can't believe the kid is getting such a brutal punishment for a simple theft, and he realizes all those rumors about the Lord turning into a kind person were just a total lie. Just as he's thinking that, the wind finally starts to die down, leaving the guard to rush forward the second the air clears. He shouts out to the kid, asking if he's still alive in there, while everyone else just stands around in total shock, staring at the middle of the street. The wind dies down and reveals a random guy with goggles lying flat on his back. The guard is totally caught off guard and yells out, demanding to know who he is and how an older guy ended up inside the cyclone instead of the kid. He looks around the empty street, wondering where the boy went, while the other guards move in to get a closer look at the body. One of them tells the others to hold on a second because he recognizes the face. And it turns out this guy is actually a huge deal in the underworld. He's a top member of the Crimson Gang known as White Shadow Garu, which leaves the criminal just lying there with his head spinning. He can't even form a sentence, just making weird noises while the guards realize they've stumbled onto a major catch. They had heard he went off the grid months ago, but nobody expected him to be hiding out in this territory. And one of the guards just stares at him, trying to figure out what a high-level criminal was doing in a place like this. Klaus starts walking away, casually mentioning that he's already got the bad guy trapped in that wind prison for them. He tells the guards to handle the boring paperwork, and as he disappears, the guards can't stop talking about how the Lord even managed to sniff out that fake dragon meat scam. They're completely stunned by how sharp he is, and a few days go by without much trouble. Klaus is just hanging out when someone brings up the news that the whole criminal organization has been completely destroyed. The local townswoman is all smiles, talking about how the Crimson Gang is gone. She's relieved because now everyone can finally go out and shop without feeling like they're in danger. And Klaus hears the news and starts thinking. He repeats the name of the criminal group to himself, looking like he's got something brewing in his head. He figures that if he's going to be a top-tier villain, having a crew like that working for him would be a pretty boss move. So he decides to head out and check the aftermath of the recent crime. He's actually hyped to see the people looking miserable and upset, thinking it'll be a great sight, but it's the exact opposite when he gets there. The people are cheering and thanking him with huge smiles, calling him a great lord for everything he did. And Klaus just stands there with his jaw on the floor. He's completely shocked because this wasn't the reaction he was going for at all. And then a guard comes running up to him, yelling out for the Lord to get his attention. The guard bows down and tells Klaus that his plan from the other day was a total masterpiece. He proudly reports that they managed to wipe out the entire Crimson organization because of him, which leaves Klaus standing there with a totally blank look on his face. He has no idea what the guard is even talking about or how things ended up this way. Moving on, and the focus shifts to the street kid Klaus caught earlier, who's just looking off to the side while people keep talking about the Lord's latest move. The guard points out one of the captured guys, explaining that he's actually a high-ranking member of Crimson who'd been using a magic tool to hide his face, and he keeps gushing about how Klaus saw right through the disguise from the start. Klaus just stands there looking completely drained. This whole misunderstood hero routine is starting to feel way too familiar. Moving on, the guard explains the gang's whole setup. They were using illusion magic to look like harmless kids, tricking people into feeling sorry for them so they could rob everyone blind in groups. And he tells Klaus that now the crime wave is finally over. He's convinced Klaus was just testing the enemy's magic tools for research, which makes it look like everything was part of a big plan. The guard mentions that they didn't stop there. They squeeze the executive for info and track down the crooked merchant and the rest of the hideouts, meaning they managed to wreck a massive criminal plot before it could even get off the ground, all thanks to Klaus being one step ahead of everyone else. Suddenly, the street kid Klaus helped earlier jumps in, excited to tell his side of the story. He tells the crowd he saw the whole thing go down with the Crimson boss, and he starts acting out the scene for everyone watching. He puts on a serious face and quotes Klaus, saying people like those thugs have no place in his territory. The kid keeps the performance going with a lot of energy, telling the crowd that the Lord said he would never forgive that kind of behavior, And finally, he finishes it off with stars in his eyes. He repeats the last part about the Lord never letting anyone hurt his people, making Klaus look like the most heroic leader ever. The crowd is absolutely losing it, cheering about how moved they were by Klaus's noble vibe. He just stands there looking completely lost, wondering how his life turned into this weird hero fantasy. People start flooding the streets, all of them shouting for their lord at the top of their lungs. It's a total fan club moment, and the chanting just doesn't stop. Klaus is sweating bullets, muttering to himself about how much this sucks. The better he tries to look like a villain, the more they love him. While the townspeople run around celebrating their hero, Klaus is busy screaming in his head. He can't figure out how things got so messed up, but back at the manor, a maid stops cleaning to look out the window. She hears the noise and wonders what's going on. Later, when Klaus finally makes it back, the staff is already waiting. One of the maids welcomes him home and says she's already heard the amazing rumors about what he did in town. It's the last straw for him. Klaus starts shaking so hard he actually collapses from the shock of being famous. He just wanted to be a background lackey, not a local legend. Eventually, Klaus pulls himself together, but he's still annoyed. He sighs and asks Oliver why he has to be the one to go fetch the luggage himself. And Oliver explains that the room they're going to has a special seal on it. Turns out, the door only opens for someone with Rainford blood, so he's the only one who can do it. Oliver's glasses catch the light as he gets a serious look on his face. He adds one more detail. There's something else Klaus needs to know. Oliver adjusts his monocle while reminding Klaus they've got a massive pile of work to catch up on from the last 3 days. Turns out, Klaus has been stuck in bed that whole time. The shock of becoming so popular with the locals actually wiped him out. And it was Oliver, the family butler, who had to step up. While Klaus was busy recovering from his identity crisis, Oliver was the one secretly handling all the Lord's duties to keep the estate running. So Klaus sits at his desk, realizing that ever since his parents passed and he woke up in this world, things have only gone smoothly because of Oliver. He knows he'd be totally lost trying to manage this territory without the guy's help. But even though he knows he owes him, Klaus just looks away and keeps his mouth shut. Oliver stands there looking pretty proud of his young master, which just makes things more awkward since Klaus is secretly planning to prove to everyone that he's a massive villain very soon. Oliver can only tilt his head in confusion at the weird vibe his master is giving off. Right before a loud scream suddenly echoes through the manor, Klaus drops his edgy act immediately and looks toward the source of the noise. He starts heading toward the sound to see what's going on, while Oliver follows close behind, looking completely blindsided by the commotion and shouting for him to wait. They turn the corner and find a maid clutching her mop, looking like she's seen a ghost. As soon as she sees Klaus, she freezes up and realizes she's standing right in front of the Lord himself. She immediately drops into a deep bow, shaking while she begs for forgiveness. She's totally losing it and apologizing as hard as she can, and Klaus looks down to see a wooden bucket tipped over on its side. It's pretty obvious she just had a little accident and spilled some water while she was cleaning the floors. Klaus watches the maid shake like a leaf and realizes she's absolutely terrified of getting punished for her mistake, and he thinks this is actually perfect. Her being this scared of him is definitely going to boost his villainous reputation. But as he stands there looking down at her bowing on the floor, he starts to feel like something is a bit off about the whole situation. The way she's trembling seems a little over the top for just spilling some water, which suddenly reminds him of a specific detail because this maid has black hair, and in the Solstia Kingdom, people with dark hair are treated like garbage since everyone thinks they have demon blood. Even though it's been proven that the demon blood thing is a total lie, the locals still hold a massive grudge and treat them poorly, leaving Klaus remembering a heroine from the game he played who went through this exact same nightmare. He gets a little choked up thinking about it since her story of fighting against all that hate was so sad it actually made him cry a bunch of times back in his old life. The maid looks up at him with these sad, tired eyes and quietly asks him if everything is okay, but Klaus snaps out of it and yells that he doesn't care about any of that, claiming that as a top-tier villain, he's still going to punish her. Klaus keeps his cool and tells her that even though he wants to handle this now, his official duties have to come first, so he just tells her to get back to work. Marie is totally caught off guard by the sudden change in tone. She looks relieved and quickly shouts back that she'll get right on it, and Klaus turns his back and tells Oliver it's time to move, leaving the butler bowing as they head out. While he walks away, Klaus can't stop thinking about how weird it is that he doesn't remember seeing a girl that stands out that much. But Oliver fills him in later, saying her name is Marie, and she's been serving the family since back when Klaus's father was in charge. Klaus looks over some papers at his desk and asks why he's never even seen her before if she's been around that long. Oliver looks down a bit and explains that the poor girl is barely given any work at all, and she's usually just stuck doing random chores or cleaning in areas far away from the center of the house, which means Klaus never really had a chance to run into her or find out she even worked there. Klaus looks pretty stressed and repeats what he just heard, asking if it's actually true that the girl is barely given any work to do at all. Oliver stands there at attention while Klaus points out that even though Marie is supposed to be a maid, she's not doing any of the actual duties. Klaus gets annoyed and asks if she's just some slacker who avoids her job, but Oliver quickly clarifies that it isn't like that. Klaus can't help but think back to his past life and how much he hated people who would dump all their responsibilities onto him. So he pictures those fake co-workers who would kiss up to the boss just to get ahead while everyone else did the heavy lifting. While he holds his head in frustration, Klaus tells Oliver that if Marie is that same kind of person, he's going to have to punish her. Klaus is totally drained and just slumps over his desk while Oliver mentions that unlike everyone else, she lives alone in the annex. But Klaus realizes he wasn't really paying attention and tries to confirm if he just heard correctly about her living by herself. He tells Oliver to go grab the floor plans for the entire manor right away, which leaves the butler looking a little confused. As they wait, Klaus thinks about how it's definitely weird that Marie is the only person using that separate building all on her own. Klaus keeps thinking about the situation, feeling like there's no way his strict parents would have let a total slacker off the hook like this, and he starts picturing Marie getting showered with affection as their favorite maid. It definitely looks like she was getting some serious special treatment, but Klaus shuts that thought down immediately. There's just no way his parents, who were known for being pretty terrible people, would actually do something that nice. Plus, if he keeps treating her like a favorite, everyone will start thinking he's a nice guy, which would totally wreck his plan to look like a top-tier villain. He turns to Oliver and gives a direct order, telling him to go tell Marie to grab only her absolute essentials and wait for him outside the annex right now. Oliver stands at attention and says he'll get it done immediately, looking way more intense about the task than Klaus expected, which makes Klaus wonder why the butler is suddenly so fired up about this. But he decides to just brush it off and figures he might as well head over to that separate building himself to see what the deal is with where Marie is staying. Once they get there, Klaus just stares at the building, completely thrown off by what's standing right in front of him. It turns out the place is actually pretty nice. Klaus even realizes it's way better than the crappy apartment he had back when he was a corporate slave. Klaus looks at the building and realizes his parents actually treated Marie pretty well, giving her a nice place because they liked her, which just makes him more annoyed. Marie walks up with her bags and nervously calls out to him, saying she brought everything he told her to. She stands there in the middle of the yard, looking small with her luggage, and asks Klaus what he's actually planning to do with her. But Klaus just gives her this intense look. He asks what she's even talking about, and since in his mind, the plan is already set in stone, he plants his feet firmly on the ground and tells her to just shut up and watch closely because he's about to show her exactly how things are going to go from now on. He holds out his hand and says, this is his final answer. Suddenly, he lets loose a massive spell called Storm of Destruction. A huge vortex of wind rips through the air, and the entire building just starts falling apart. So wood and stone go flying everywhere while Oliver and Marie just stand there watching the annex get completely wrecked. Marie is left totally speechless, staring at the ruins of her home. She finally manages to find her voice and asks what the hell he's doing. But Klaus just stays calm and tells her it's exactly what it looks like. Klaus stands in front of the wreckage and tells Marie that since the place is trashed, she won't be living in this annex anymore. Marie just stands there staring at the pile of rocks that used to be her home, looking totally lost, while Klaus watches her closely. He figures she's just reeling from the shock of losing her special treatment and being treated like everyone else. Marie looks down at the ground, in her voice shaking as she asks him what's going to happen to her now. But Klaus acts like the answer is obvious. He tells her she's moving into the shared dorms with all the other maids, and on top of that, she's expected to actually pull her weight and help out with all the work around the main mansion. He points a finger at her just to make sure she gets the point. He's not going to put up with any laziness. Marie grips her bag so hard her knuckles turn white as the reality of the situation finally starts to sink in. Klaus decides he's done talking and starts walking away, telling Oliver to take care of the rest of the details since he's pretty sure he heard her voice shaking with rage. He walks off with a smug look, thinking this move is definitely going to cement his status as a cold-hearted villain. Klaus walks away laughing to himself, feeling pretty good about his plan to look like a total jerk, but Marie just stands there in the silence, thinking back to when she was just a little kid. Back then, she lived with her mother, who also had the same black hair, which meant they both had to deal with people being awful to them because of the way they looked. Things only changed because the royal family stepped in. They told all the nobles they needed to start hiring people with black hair to stop the prejudice. By the time Marie turned 12, the old Viscount Rainford decided he wanted to score some points with the royals, so he hired Marie's mother and tucked them away in that old, falling-apart annex on the edge of the estate. The other servants piled way more work on her mom than anyone else. Since she was already pretty weak, she eventually got sick and died, leaving Marie to take over her job. The family only kept her around because they needed a black-haired servant to keep up appearances, even though they only gave her small, pointless chores to do while she lived alone in that broken-down building. Marie realizes she honestly has no idea why she's still staying at this place, but she's too scared to actually pack up and leave. Living in that broken-down annex was more than just a place to stay. It was like a curse that kept Marie trapped there, and Marie can still remember her mother's final words, promising her that one day she'd get out and see the world. But Marie just cries, telling her mom she can't do it because she's stuck here forever and just wants to be taken away. Her mother pets her head and says she's sorry she can't take her along. But Marie needs to know it'll be okay since someone is definitely going to show up one day to get her out of that place. Though Marie never actually believed those words, thinking even a new lord wouldn't care she existed, yet she stands there in total shock, just staring and wondering what's going on, because Klaus is standing right in front of her. Even though he never visits this part of the estate, she immediately bows as low as she can, shouting that she's so sorry for whatever she did, while shaking and thinking about the rumors that the Lord has actually become a nice person lately. The word is getting out that the Lord handled that crooked merchant and even went easy on the staff who messed up, so everyone is talking about how he gave the perfect orders to wipe out a criminal group, and these rumors are spreading fast. Marie looks up with a new light in her eyes, wondering if the Lord is really the person who's going to save her, because Klaus tells her it's only right that she moves into the regular maid rooms and starts working with the rest of the staff, and he points right at her, telling her to keep her eyes on him since this is his answer to her prayers. Marie closes her eyes with a peaceful smile, telling her mom in her head that she can finally keep her promise. Oliver finds her later and says he's genuinely happy she finally got the chance to move out of that rundown annex. Marie wipes a stray tear from her eye and thanks him, remembering how Oliver was always the one person looking out for her. She bows deeply with her bags packed, saying she's so grateful to finally be treated like a normal person. But Oliver mentions he just got another message from Klaus, telling her to grab the basics and wait for what comes next. Marie is told to make sure she packs all the stuff she has left from her mom, and she says she's just glad she didn't lose anything important. But Oliver just closes his eyes and says he's not the one she should be thanking. He looks at her and reminds her that her real master is Klaus, which makes Marie stop and think for a second. She repeats the word master to herself, realizing that Klaus isn't just a great lord, but something much more than that. She decides right then that he's the best person she could ever work for, and she's ready to serve him forever. With her bags packed, Marie looks back one last time with a big smile and says thanks to her new master. Back at the manor, Klaus is standing there looking completely spooked for no reason, and he's totally breaking a sweat. He starts shivering in the middle of the hallway, wondering why he feels so cold and if he's still just sick or something. But he brushes it off and smiles, thinking about how everything actually turned out pretty good this time around. He looks ahead, already wondering what kind of crazy event is going to show up next to ruin his reputation again. Gwen stands there sweating and looking completely pale, telling himself there's no way this is actually happening while a massive, terrifying monster stands in front of them. It's a sudden mutation that nobody was prepared for. This was supposed to be just another regular dungeon run for Gwen and his party, but things went wrong fast. He stares at the beast in total disbelief, repeating the word mutation over and over like he can't wrap his head around it. These things usually happen because of some crazy shift in the environment, or because a monster starts eating others, leading to the dungeon boss evolving into a much more dangerous high ogre, a monster that's on a completely different level. Gwen watches one of his friends get sent flying and knocked out cold with a single hit, realizing the creature's speed and power are insane. He looks back at his fallen teammate, knowing for a fact that they aren't going to make it out if they have to carry someone. Gwen lets out a frustrated shout as they retreat, while the healer behind him yells that they need to call the guild for help right now. She holds out her hand and focuses everything she has, instantly activating her communication magic to send out a desperate SOS. The healer on the other side of the call sounds panicked, asking if the guild even has anyone strong enough to take on a high ogre. She warns Gwen that even if they find someone, it's going to take way too long for help to reach them. But Gwen isn't hearing any of it, yelling back that it doesn't matter because they have to do something right now. He reports that they've run into a mutated boss deep in the dungeon, and the situation is basically a total disaster. He tells her he can't just leave his friends behind after they got wrecked, so he's going to stay and buy as much time as possible. He begs her to send help as fast as they can, and then the communication cuts out as he prays the message actually makes it to the guild. While back at the estate, Gwen gets into a stance and readies his sword, telling himself he just needs to hold the line until then. He charges straight at the massive, that armored monster with everything he's got, determined to buy every second he can. Meanwhile, Klaus is back at the manor sitting at his desk, going over papers and planning out his next moves. He just finished destroying the maid's room as part of his plan, and now he's thinking about how he needs to get a lot stronger. Since he's aiming to be the ultimate final boss, power is basically a requirement. Ever since he woke up in this world, he's been training his sword skills and magic every single day, but he feels like his progress has stalled out lately, making him think he might have hit his limit for now. In the world of the game, main characters get better at their skills the more they actually use them. It's a simple system where practice makes perfect, but there's a catch. Eventually, skills hit a wall. To keep getting stronger, the character's overall level has to go up too, meaning it all leads back to one obvious solution for the situation he's in right now. Klaus gets fired up and says he's going to do the classic move for leveling up. He decides he's heading straight for a dungeon to hunt some monsters, leaving Oliver standing back at the office looking at an empty desk and wondering where he disappeared to. Meanwhile, Klaus is already deep in the woods. As he walks, he thinks about how he already researched this dungeon. He's pretty sure he can handle whatever is inside without any real trouble. Suddenly, something catches his eye and he stops. He sees something flying through the air toward him, and before he even thinks about it, he reacts. He looks a bit surprised at himself, saying he accidentally ended up slashing the thing. He stares at the ground and wonders what this weird little blue bird is supposed to be, but then it clicks for him. He realizes this bird is actually a monster from the dungeon, and it might just be the partner he needs. The little bird lies there on the ground, letting out one last weird chirp about wanting to earn something. Klaus picks up the small creature and realizes it was actually a piece of communication magic. He starts wondering if it was just out trying to find some friends, but he figures out the bird was meant to deliver a specific message to someone. It's pretty clear the message got messed up because he attacked it so fast. He looks down at the bird in his palm, so realizing it's never going to reach its destination now. Even though he feels a little guilty about wrecking the bird's mission, he tells himself that a top-tier villain shouldn't worry about the small things, so he tucks the little guy into his shirt for safekeeping. He promises to give it a proper burial later, but for now, it's just going to hitch a ride while he finally reaches the entrance of the dungeon, where the dark stone tunnel leads deep underground. Standing right at the mouth of the cave, Klaus decides he needs to get fully prepared before stepping into the dark. He pulls out a B-class ring that's a total double-edged sword. It'll boost his power by 50%, but the cost is losing 1% of his health every 10 seconds. Then he grabs a bottle of lure liquid made from monster blood. He knows that once he puts this on, every monster in the area is going to hunt him down. Klaus thinks back to the game mechanics of Alterna Fantasia, specifically how solo play is actually the best way to level up fast. He can't help but wonder how this was ever marketed as a romance game when the grind is so intense. To get the most experience, you have to hunt things much stronger than you, and the bonus gets even bigger the lower your health stays during the fight. He knows the pros used to use cursed rings to drain their own health on purpose to stay in that high reward zone. And with a determined look, he checks his gear and gets ready for the challenge ahead. He actually got this specialized equipment from the items he confiscated from that crooked merchant, who is still tied up and looking pretty pathetic. Using these items definitely makes things more dangerous. But Klaus is confident his meta-knowledge of the game will keep him safe while he starts dousing himself in the monster lure liquid. As the blood-colored juice soaks into his clothes, he tells himself that the prep is finally done and it's time to move. The effect is instant. A pack of monsters with glowing eyes comes screaming out of the darkness, smelling the lure and looking for blood. Klaus doesn't even flinch as they swarm him. He cuts through a wolf monster with one clean swing, and immediately follows up by blasting another one with a point-blank fire spell. Once the dust settles, he stands over a pile of dead monsters as a golden light starts to wrap around him. He takes a second to realize that this must be the actual feeling of leveling up, and as he looks down at his hand, he says that this rush is something he could definitely get addicted to. Klaus stands in the hallway, noting that the boss room is right ahead. He figures it's getting late, so he might as well just take out the boss and head back home. But as he gets closer, he stops, hearing the sounds of a struggle coming from inside the room. He wonders what's going on. thinking that maybe someone else already beat him to the punch, and he lets out a long sigh, saying it can't be helped. Even though it's annoying, he's already made up his mind that he's just going to steal the kill. He knows that taking a monster from other adventurers is a massive taboo in this world, but he doesn't really care as he walks into the main chamber. He remembers that the boss here is supposed to be an ogre, but he stops in his tracks with a confused look. Something feels off, so he looks at the massive creature standing in the center of the room. He tries to remember the ogres from the game, wondering if they were really supposed to be this huge. It's way bigger than he expected, though he eventually just shrugs it off. He tells himself there are bound to be some small differences between the game and how things actually look in real life. Klaus narrows his eyes with total focus, deciding that the size doesn't matter. Leveling up is the only thing that's important right now, and he's not letting anything get in his way. Without wasting another second, he sticks his hand out and casts a massive fire spell. He calls out the prominence burst, sending a huge wave of flames toward the center of the room, leaving the ogre looking completely shocked as the fire comes screaming toward it. It doesn't even have time to react before the blast starts to rip through the air right in front of its face. Klaus stands in the middle of the smoke, looking pretty satisfied with himself. He says the job is done and the monster is officially taken care of, and he notices that his attack felt way stronger than usual. He figures the level up is already paying off, looking at how much his magic power has jumped since he started. So over by the sidelines, Gwen is losing it. He yells out, asking what that blast even was, and wonders who could have pulled off something so crazy. One of the other adventurers points toward the gate, shouting for everyone to look over there. Klaus is just standing there by the exit, looking totally calm while the party stares at him in disbelief. They can't believe their eyes, asking each other if that guy was really the one who just wrecked the boss. Gwen tells everyone to hold on as he gets a better look. He starts to freak out a little, realizing that the guy standing there looks familiar, and he finally puts the pieces together. He yells out in total shock, recognizing Klaus as the lord of the territory right as Klaus turns around and starts walking away. Gwen reaches out and begs him to wait, but Klaus doesn't even slow down. As he leaves, Klaus gets a shady little smirk on his face. He thinks to himself that showing his face to those guys was actually part of the plan, and he hopes they'll go tell everyone what happened. He wants them to spread rumors that he's the worst guy around for stealing people's kills, leaving the party behind feeling completely broken. Klaus is pretty hyped that his plan worked out so well. Even though he just wanted to level up, he figures this outcome is like killing two birds with one stone, so he just runs off into the distance, laughing his head off. He thinks to himself that just wrecking monsters on his way back home is the most efficient way to spend his time. He's feeling pretty good about how things are going, giving himself a little mental thumbs up as he heads back. Meanwhile, back in town, the adventuring party is telling their story at the tavern. They explain how they ran into a mutant monster and used up every single item they had, but when their communication magic got cut off, they thought they were dead for sure. Gwen leans in and tells the crowd that right when things were at their worst, someone stepped in to save them. He drops the bombshell that the mysterious hero was actually the Lord himself, and he explains that the crazy part is the guy didn't even want a reward. He didn't even bother giving his name. He just did the job and left without asking for anything. Gwen starts getting emotional, telling everyone that the Lord must have rushed over the second he sensed their distress call. He's convinced the guy got covered in blood just to reach them in time, and he realizes they only made it back alive because of him. The healer of the group adds in that she could see his status, and his health was actually down to 10%. And she tells the group that he was in such bad shape he could have collapsed at any moment, but the rest of the party is just as moved. They can't believe the Lord would be so reckless and push himself to the brink of death just to save a bunch of random adventurers like them. The people at the tavern start talking about the rumors they've been hearing about the Lord changing his ways lately. One guy admits he feels like a complete jerk for not believing the stories until he heard this, and everyone raises their mugs for a massive toast. They all agree that Lord Klaus is a much better person than any other noble they've ever heard of, and they're all in on supporting him now. The tavern is absolutely buzzing as everyone starts yelling for the Lord, cheering his name over and over while the party at the guild keeps going until the sun comes up. The story of what he did starts spreading to every adventurer in town, and honestly, it's so moving that it's got grown men crying into their drinks. Right at that moment, Klaus lets out a massive sneeze that nearly knocks him over, making him stop in the middle of the hallway to rub his nose. He's walking along wondering if some jerk is talking behind his back and spreading more trashy rumors about him, but he just shakes it off and starts laughing to himself. He's feeling better than ever and can't help but let out a big laugh because everything is finally going his way. Fast forward a few days later at the manor, and Klaus is looking at his hands. thinking about the grind. He's spent the last few days hitting up a bunch of different dungeons, and it's really paid off since his level has shot up a ton. He's looking pretty smug about his progress, figuring he's pretty much hit the level cap for any dungeon in this part of the country. Since he can't get any stronger around here, he decides it's probably time to actually sit down and do his job as a noble for a bit. Just as he's settling in, Oliver calls out to him, asking if he has a second to talk. Klaus asks him what's up, and Oliver just clears his throat with a serious look on his face, looking like he's got something important to say. Oliver explains that he wants to promote one of the house servants to be Klaus's personal maid, but Klaus just looks at him like he's crazy, questioning the whole idea of having someone following him around. Before he can argue, Oliver just tells the person waiting outside to come in. Marie walks into the room looking like a proper maid and introduces herself, promising that she's going to work as hard as possible to meet his expectations and serve him with all her heart. She gives him a sweet look and tells him he shouldn't hesitate to ask her for anything at all from now on. But Klaus starts thinking back to when he used his magic to blow her house away. He had a feeling something like this might happen, and it's pretty obvious she must have a huge grudge against him for wrecking her life. Marie just stands there with a big, innocent smile on her face, making Klaus wonder if she actually went to Oliver and volunteered for this just so she could get close enough to get her revenge. He keeps a close eye on her, feeling totally suspicious as he tries to guess what kind of crazy stunt she's planning to pull on him. Klaus looks away and breaks a sweat, feeling the pressure while he tries to figure out how the hell he's supposed to handle having her around. It turns out Oliver's suggestion went through without a hitch, and now this girl with the black hair is officially his new personal maid. He can't shake the feeling that her only reason for being here is to get back at him for destroying her home, and it's definitely got him on edge. Marie asks if he called for her. Her voice comes out of nowhere, and Klaus nearly jumps out of his skin because he didn't even hear her approach, which makes him wonder how the hell she got so close without him noticing. He shakes it off though, thinking that her showing up right now is actually a lucky break. Klaus puts on his best serious face and tells Marie to follow him, saying it's time he taught her what the actual responsibilities of a personal maid are. Marie looks pretty surprised by the sudden order, but she doesn't hesitate for long and quickly tells him that she understands. While she stands there looking all ready to work, Klaus is secretly watching her. He's convinced his genius brain will help him see right through whatever revenge plot she's cooking up. He takes her straight to the kitchen and explains that they're starting with food. He tells her that any decent maid has to know how to make tea and handle basic meals. Otherwise, she's basically dead weight. Marie looks a bit overwhelmed by the kitchen setup, but she stays polite and says she'll do her best to try and make something. She keeps glancing back at him like she's nervous while her hand starts shaking as she reaches for some eggs on the counter. Klaus watches her struggle from the side with a smug look on his face, and thinking to himself that she looks like she hasn't touched a kitchen in years and has probably been slacking off. But the truth is, he doesn't actually give a damn about her cooking skills. He's got other things on his mind. Klaus watches Marie work and starts questioning why he's even making her do this. But then, he figures that since she definitely hates his guts, all this kitchen work is just piling on the stress until she finally snaps. He's basically waiting for her to hit her limit and show her true self so he can catch her in the act and expose her whole revenge plot. Though things aren't exactly going according to plan, he looks over and sees a totally different vibe than what he expected. The estate chef is actually being super helpful, telling Marie that controlling the heat is the most important part while she follows along perfectly. Klaus just stands there looking annoyed because if everyone is being this nice, there's no way she's going to get mad enough to slip up. Before he can come up with a new plan, Marie shows up with a finished plate and happily tells him that the food is all done. The two of them head to the dining area where Klaus sits down to start eating. Marie just stands there watching him, waiting to see what he thinks. He takes a few bites and realizes it's not actually that great, thinking it's only edible because the chef helped her out so much. But he knows he can't just say that to her face, especially with her standing right there looking like she's dying for a compliment. Klaus looks at Marie and realizes the food plan didn't work, so he figures the only way to make her snap is to bury her in every other chore he can find until he suddenly tells her it's time to move on to the next thing, leaving Marie totally confused as she rushes to follow him. First, he assigns her as his office assistant and dumps a massive pile of paperwork in her arms. But that's just the start because right after that, and he sends her outside to handle all the laundry for the estate, then makes her head back inside to sweep and scrub every inch of his private bedroom. Even after all that, Klaus just keeps the work coming, giving her a workload that's honestly way too much for any one person to handle alone. Yet, Marie still isn't showing any signs of getting mad, making Klaus realize that breaking her spirit might take a lot longer than just one afternoon. He decides right then to switch to a long-term strategy and calls out to her while she's still busy sweeping, pointing a finger and telling her that from tomorrow on, she's going to be doing this exact same crazy schedule every single day. Klaus walks away feeling pretty good about himself. He's sure that piling on the stress like this will eventually make her lose it. Marie looks down at her hands and thinks about her master, realizing that she's finally done it and actually became his personal maid. She's honestly so happy about how things turned out, but at the same time, she's pretty worried if she can actually handle being by his side every day like this. She starts thinking back to the first job he ever gave her, which was cooking, something she was never allowed to do before since people used to say they'd never eat food touched by someone with black hair. Because she was banned from the kitchen back then, she's not great at it, but she still tries her best to meet his expectations. After getting some help from the estate chef, she finally gets the meal ready, even though it didn't turn out perfect and has some burnt spots on it. But even with the mistakes, Klaus just eats the whole thing without saying a word. Marie is getting emotional because no one has ever been willing to eat the food she cooked before. Her heart is just full of happiness right now, and it's not just the cooking she's handling. She's moved on to doing the laundry and even cleaning the master's private bedroom, tucking the sheets, and realizing she's been trusted with the most personal parts of his life. She knows her work today wasn't exactly perfect, and she's worried she might actually lose her spot as his personal maid for it. But Klaus stops her and says he wants her to do the exact same routine tomorrow. He just wants to make sure she's okay with that. The door clicks shut as he leaves, and Marie just stands there looking at it while whispering to herself. She starts thinking that he really does trust her. She feels like he actually wants her by his side from now on, and that makes her more determined than ever. She's set on pushing forward to become a maid who can really meet his expectations, leaving Klaus thinking to himself that she'll hit her limit eventually. He's planning to dump even more work on her starting tomorrow to see how she handles it, so the next morning she shows up right on time, telling him his tea is ready as she sets it down on his desk. Klaus notices that the tea and food have been tasting way better lately. He figures it's because Marie's been taking lessons from the estate chef, and while he'd love to just be impressed by how hard she's working to improve, he can't quite let his guard down yet since he's pretty sure she's eventually going to try and slip some poison into his meals to get her revenge. Since his plan to expose her true nature is turning into a long-term project, he decides to flip the script and use the situation to his advantage, training himself to handle being targeted, which is a must if he wants to be the ultimate final boss. So every time he eats or drinks something Marie serves him, he makes sure to cast magic on himself that boosts his resistance to any status effects, and after doing this for a few days, it's actually working. His body has reached a point where it can pretty much nullify most poisons now, and a fact he's even gone out of his way to test. He actually feels a bit thankful to Marie for the accidental training as he casually nibbles on a poisonous herb. Moving on, he decides it's finally time to stop messing around and get focused on clearing out the pile of documents on his desk. But as he's going through the stack, a specific envelope catches his eye and makes him stop. He picks it up, looking at the seal and wondering why Marquis Wyndham would be sending him a letter. This guy's Marquis Wyndham. He's actually just a side character from the game who lives in the royal capital and is known as the king's most trusted noble. Even though he's important, he wears that eye patch because he's only got one eye, which apparently made him a huge hit with all the hardcore female fans. In the game's story, he's busy trying to take down a secret group called the Phantom Hand, and even asks the main heroes to help him out. But after that one part, he basically just vanishes from the plot, making him a pretty wasted character in the end. Klaus sits at his desk reading through the letter, realizing it's actually an invitation to a party celebrating Wyndham's 10th year as head of his house. He looks at the paper and thinks to himself that there's really no point in him showing up to something like this. He figures if the invite was from Luciel, it'd be a different story. But since Wyndham is a good guy type, there's no reason for them to be friends. So he's just about to move on when Marie walks into the room, telling him she's brought some more tea for him. But just then, she trips. She lets out a scream as the teacup and saucer go flying right off her tray. The teacup and plate slip right off Marie's tray and hit the floor. Klaus just sits there watching it happen as the cup breaks into pieces. Instead of getting mad, he actually looks kind of impressed and tells her that wasn't bad at all. He looks at the steaming mess and thinks that since she couldn't poison him, she's moved on to heat attacks. He realizes he's going to have to keep his heat resistance magic active. Marie is standing there shaking like crazy. She can barely get the word master out because she's so scared. She bows down as low as she can, saying she's incredibly sorry and that a personal maid should never make a mistake like this. She tells him she'll take any punishment he gives her, while Klaus notices the tea splashed everywhere, even all over the letter he was reading. Suddenly, Klaus gets a look on his face like he just had a genius idea while holding the ruined paper. Marie is still braced for the worst, wondering if she's gonna get locked up or whipped. She tells him she's ready for whatever he's got. Klaus just looks at her and tells her he's not thinking about anything like that. He holds up the tea-stained letter and says he's just gonna send it back to the Marquise exactly like this. And Marie can't believe what she's hearing. Klaus explains that sending back a letter in such a mess is basically like picking a fight with every noble out there. But he's actually loving the idea, thinking about how his bad reputation is finally going to spread way past his lands and all the way to the capital. He tells Marie she did a great job since her mistake gave him this perfect plan, so he's letting her off the hook just this once. Marie is totally moved, thinking he's just making a joke to be nice. She's more convinced than ever that he's the best master. Turns out he wasn't kidding, and the narration confirms he actually sent the tea-stained letter back exactly as it was, leaving Orth Wyndham sitting in silence. The man known as the King's Dagger looks completely drained while holding the ruined paper. Things are getting heavy because the royal spies just reported some pretty scary signs that the Demon King is actually coming back. Now, if that happens, there's a huge chance the Solstia Kingdom is going to get hit with a massive invasion, which means Orth can't put all his focus on the Demon King. Rebels are popping up everywhere, and he knows some nobles are involved, but can't prove who. He rubs his head in stress, explaining how he even got the king involved to set up a party to investigate the suspicious nobles. Orth Wyndham is completely stressed out. He grabs his head and asks what he's even looking at. He can't believe the letter he sent was mailed back in this state. He stares at the tea-stained mess, wondering what Klaus is actually planning. His butler speaks up, reminding him that the new Viscount is basically just a kid who took over the house a few months ago. Orth sighs, thinking about how the family always had a bad reputation. But he's shocked the kid is being this openly hostile. And just as he's losing hope, the butler tells him to wait. Orth looks up, noticing something in his servant's voice. The butler asks if the shape of the tea stain looks like it's trying to show them something specific, and Orth doesn't get it at first. Suddenly, it clicks. Orth looks at the paper and realizes the stain is shaped exactly like the mark of our frontier territory. That place is bad news, since the guy ruling it sits right between the human and demon worlds. Everyone says he's working with demons. Orth is sweating now. He stares at the map on the letter, wondering if this could really just be a random accident. The butler still isn't convinced it's that simple. He asks to take another look because something about the whole thing feels wrong. The butler leans in and points at the messy tea stain. He asks Orth if the letters hidden under the wet spots might actually mean something, and Orth takes a closer look, spotting specific words like vassal and caution, along with some random sounds that don't make sense yet. He reads the warning to be careful of a vassal. It hits him that maybe one of the Frontier Count's top guys is secretly plotting something big. And he starts piecing together the rest of the letters. He slowly sounds out the syllables until the name finally clicks in his head. The butler can't believe it. He yells out the name Phantom Hand while looking completely shocked that this group is involved. He explains that they're a dangerous criminal group that everyone in the capital has been talking about lately. But it gets even worse. The rumors say they're actually working with the demon race to try and destroy the Solstia Kingdom from the inside. Orth stands there thinking about Klaus. He wonders why the young Viscount went through so much effort to send a warning about these guys. He struggles to figure out where the kid got the intel. There's no way a sneaky guy like the Frontier Count would just tell a new lord his secrets. Orth realizes the truth. Klaus must have his own massive spy network to find this out, and he even used a code to keep it safe. Orth tells his butler that no matter what the truth is, they have to act fast. He orders him to keep a close watch on the Frontier Count's guy and to get the guards ready immediately. The butler bows and says he's on it, heading out to spread the word. Orth sits there thinking that if Klaus's tip is actually right, the kid might be a genius who's about to change the whole country. Turns out he was totally right. 1 month later at a big party, a traitor uses magic to look like a knight and starts a massive ambush with a bunch of monsters. And the leader of the pack yells out that they're the Phantom Hand. He tells his crew to kill every single person in the room without leaving anyone alive. He calls on his monsters to go wild and tear the place apart, leaving the nobles at the party screaming and losing their minds as the giant wolves move in. The hooded guy starts laughing like a crazy person because he thinks everything is going perfectly. But then he stops and looks at the entrance. A massive wall of fully armed knights and guards is already standing there waiting for them, and the guy completely loses his cool. He starts backing up, asking what's going on and why there are so many soldiers ready to fight. Orth doesn't waste any time and shouts for his soldiers to neutralize the intruders right now. The lead traitor completely loses it, screaming that this wasn't part of the plan as the guards close in. Since the Wyndham family was ready for everything, the knights take out the monsters and save the day. They get one of the hooded guys on his knees and demand to know who's actually running the show. The guy just gives them a creepy smile and says he'll tell them all about it when they meet in hell. And then he just blows himself up, leaving everyone in the room horrified and without a single lead to follow. Because the assassin died, Frontier Count Markovar manages to talk his way out of a death sentence for the attack. He stands there looking calm, admitting the guy worked for him but claiming he has no clue what happened. He tries to say the guy either went rogue or was just a phantom hand spy wearing a disguise to frame him. But the plan backfires anyway because the king's men used the trial to identify every noble who tried to defend him. Looking back at everything that went down, it's pretty clear this whole situation turned out to be a massive win. And the best part is that the entire mess was cleaned up without a single person getting hurt at the party. But besides the lack of injuries, there's actually one more big thing that changed in this version of the story, specifically involving Marquis Wyndham and his butler. See, in the original game world, this attack was a total disaster, where Wyndham was supposed to lose an eye and his butler was meant to die, making them the biggest victims of the night. Instead, Orth stands there perfectly fine, telling his butler he needs to make sure he thanks Klaus Rainford, and his butler completely agrees. Because of the way things played out this time around, Wyndham didn't have to lose anything at all. And shortly after the chaos settles, the scene shifts over to the royal palace where someone calls out to the king. The man standing there is King Ander von Solstia himself, the guy running the whole kingdom, looking right at Orth. He tells him he did a great job and that his handling of the attack was honestly splendid. Orth stands there with his hand over his heart, looking humble and saying he's honored by the praise. But then he tells the king there's actually something important he needs to share, specifically about the person who saw the attack coming and gave them the heads up, and he starts talking about the bravest and most talented strategist in the whole kingdom. Turns out, while Klaus is just chilling and laughing over tea, his name is finally reaching the ears of the king.